flight attendant mistreats an elderly black woman. 7 minutes later, she learns the woman owns the airline. In this compelling story, we uncover a shocking incident that unfolded mid-flight, filled with surprising twists and turns. What started as an ordinary journey quickly escalated into a tense encounter between a flight attendant and an elderly black passenger. However, the events that followed took an astonishing turn, leaving everyone on board speechless. This story is about more than just a shocking twist. It's about standing tall in the face of injustice, breaking stereotypes, and proving that strength doesn't always roar. Stay tuned to uncover how this confrontation led to an outcome no one could have anticipated. Trust me, you won't want to miss the incredible ending to this story. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear how you feel about this inspirational journey. What began as a routine flight, Mrs. Eleanor, an elegant and dignified woman in her late 70s, stood quietly in the bustling airport terminal. This trip was special to her, her first luxury airline flight, planned carefully by her son, who wanted to ensure she traveled in comfort. The journey was a milestone, marking her long-awaited visit to meet her great-grandchildren for the very first time. Dressed in a simple yet refined navy dress, a black cardigan, and her favorite pearl necklace, Eleanor radiated a quiet confidence that came from a life full of experiences. Her soft gray curls were neatly tucked under a small hat, and she carried a treasured leather handbag, a gift from her late husband that she held onto as a symbol of his enduring love. As Eleanor moved toward the boarding gate, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Flying wasn't something she did often, and being surrounded by the sleek interiors of the luxury terminal only heightened her anticipation. Her son had insisted on booking this flight, saying, "Mom, you deserve the best." While Eleanor had initially hesitated, she was grateful for the chance to avoid long car rides or bus trips. However, as she approached the boarding area, Eleanor became acutely aware of the subtle stares and whispers around her. Many of the other passengers, dressed in business suits and designer outfits, cast quick glances in her direction, their expressions unreadable but unmistakably curious. Eleanor was no stranger to these unspoken judgments. She had faced them many times in her life. Yet, with the poise of someone who had weathered life's storms, she stood tall and focused on the ticket in her hand. Row 2A. When her boarding group was called, Eleanor walked forward, clutching her ticket tightly. She smiled warmly at the flight attendant as she handed it over, but instead of receiving a kind greeting, she was met with a strained, almost dismissive tone. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am." Brushing it off, Eleanor proceeded down the jet bridge, her anticipation growing with every step. As she entered the sleek cabin, the luxurious interiors took her breath away. The plush leather seats, soft lighting, and spacious arrangement were unlike anything she had ever experienced. For a moment, she marveled at the thoughtfulness of her son and the opportunity to experience something so extraordinary. But even in this moment of gratitude, Eleanor could sense the weight of the stares from other passengers and the faint murmur of whispers. Unfazed, Eleanor moved toward her assigned seat. Despite the subtle disapproval of those around her, she held her head high, embodying grace and resilience. Little did anyone know, the quiet woman settling into row 2A was about to change everything. As Mrs. Eleanor stepped into the luxury cabin, her eyes scanned the space, taking in every detail. The soft leather seats gleamed under the cabin lights, and the air carried a faint, pleasant scent of lavender. Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude. This journey, made possible by her son, was already an experience she would cherish. She reached her assigned seat, row 2A, and carefully placed her treasured leather handbag on the floor. But before she could lift her modest carry-on into the overhead compartment, a sharp voice broke the calm. "Excuse me, ma'am," said Maya, the lead flight attendant, her tone clipped and authoritative. Eleanor turned to face Maya, who stood tall and immaculately dressed in the airline's signature uniform. Karen's expression was professional but distant, with a subtle edge of irritation, as if Eleanor's presence alone was an inconvenience. "Is this your seat?" Maya asked, glancing at Eleanor as though questioning her right to be there. "Yes, it is," Eleanor replied politely, holding up her boarding pass. Maya leaned in, inspecting the ticket closely. After a moment's pause, she gave a curt nod. "Fine," she said briskly. "Please stow your bag quickly so we can keep the boarding process moving." Eleanor, her hands trembling slightly from nervous energy, reached up to place her bag in the overhead compartment. Her movements were slower than those of the younger passengers, and as she struggled to lift the bag, Maya crossed her arms and sighed audibly. "Do you need help?" Maya asked, her tone making it clear that offering assistance was the last thing she wanted to do. Before Eleanor could respond, a kind man seated nearby stood up. "I've got this, ma'am," he said warmly, gently taking the bag from her hands and placing it in the compartment with ease. Eleanor smiled, her gratitude evident. "Thank you, young man," she said softly. The man returned to his seat, but Maya's expression soured further. "Let's not hold up the line," she muttered, her voice carrying an edge of impatience as she turned away. Eleanor settled into her seat, adjusting her handbag on her lap. She noticed the subtle glances from other passengers, some curious, some indifferent, and a few visibly uncomfortable with her presence. The whispers behind her continued, but Eleanor, drawing on her years of experience, chose to focus on the journey ahead. Maya, however, seemed determined to make Eleanor feel out of place. As she moved up and down the aisle, her eyes darted toward Eleanor repeatedly, her expression unreadable but far from welcoming. When the flight attendants began their safety preparations, Maya's hostility became even more apparent. Eleanor pressed the call button to request assistance with her seatbelt, which seemed to be stuck. Maya approached her row, her demeanor icy. "What is it now?" Maya asked, her voice low but sharp. "My seatbelt doesn't seem to fasten properly," Eleanor said, her tone polite but firm. Maya rolled her eyes. "Fine," she said, adjusting the seatbelt with a quick, rough motion before walking away without another word. A young woman seated across the aisle leaned over and whispered, "Don't mind her, Mom. She's been like this since we boarded. You're doing nothing wrong." Eleanor gave the woman a grateful smile, but she couldn't shake the weight of Maya's hostility. The tension in the air was palpable, and it was clear to everyone watching that Maya had singled Eleanor out. The murmurs among the passengers grew louder. Some exchanged disapproving glances, while others chose to remain silent. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Maya's dismissive attitude persisted, her every action seeming calculated to make Eleanor feel unwelcome. Little did Maya know her actions were setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. As the flight progressed, Maya's disdain for Mrs. Eleanor only grew more apparent. Her actions, initially subtle, became increasingly brazen. Each interaction dripped with passive aggressiveness, leaving Eleanor feeling more alienated. When Eleanor politely asked for a glass of water to take her medication, Maya's response was anything but professional. With a dramatic sigh and an audible mutter, Maya disappeared into the galley. When she returned, she practically slammed the plastic cup onto Eleanor's tray table, the water sloshing dangerously close to the edge. "Here," Maya said tersely, not bothering to meet Eleanor's eyes before walking away. Eleanor, ever composed, offered a quiet thank you before calmly taking her medication. But the interaction didn't go unnoticed. Nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some shaking their heads in disapproval. A few rows back, a young woman in business attire discreetly pulled out her phone, aiming her camera toward Maya. It was clear that others were beginning to document the incident, sensing that what they were witnessing was not just unprofessional but deeply unjust. Maya's hostility reached its peak when she returned to Eleanor's row a short while later. Noticing Eleanor's handbag tucked neatly at her feet, Maya placed her hands on her hips and declared loudly, "Mom, your bag needs to be stowed properly. I've told you before, this isn't a charity service." The sudden outburst caused a hush to fall over the cabin. Heads turned, and Eleanor could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her. Despite the humiliation, she remained calm, her voice steady. Of course, Eleanor replied softly, moving to adjust the bag. But Maya wasn't satisfied. She leaned closer, her tone accusatory. "You're holding up this flight with your endless demands. We can't keep catering to you while others wait. If you can't follow instructions, I'll have to take further action." The accusation hung in the air, and gasps rippled through the cabin. A middle-aged man across the aisle muttered, "This is ridiculous," while the young woman with the phone continued recording. Eleanor looked up at Maya, her composure unwavering despite the sting of the words. "I'm sorry if I've inconvenienced you," she said, her tone kind but firm. Maya, however, was undeterred. Turning on her heel, she strode to the front of the cabin and picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor disruption. Security will be coming aboard to assist with the situation. Thank you for your patience." The announcement sent a ripple of disbelief through the cabin. Passengers began whispering among themselves, many questioning what they had just heard. A man seated near the window exclaimed, "She's calling security. For what?" Moments later, 2 security officers boarded the plane. Maya, now wearing a smug expression, gestured toward Eleanor. "That's her," she said, her tone triumphant. Eleanor sat motionless, her hands resting calmly on her lap. As the officers approached, she met their gaze with quiet dignity. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" she asked. "Ma'am, we've been asked to escort you off the plane," one of the officers said, his tone apologetic. Eleanor nodded gracefully. "Of course. May I gather my belongings?" The officers allowed her to retrieve her handbag, and as she stood, a wave of murmurs swept through the cabin. Several passengers began voicing their objections aloud. "This is outrageous." She didn't do anything wrong. Someone should report this. The young woman with the phone called out, "Don't worry, ma'am. I've got this all recorded." Maya, now basking in what she perceived as a victory, smirked as she watched Eleanor being escorted off the plane. Her heels clicked confidently against the floor as she strutted back down the aisle, clearly relishing her perceived authority. But Maya's moment of triumph would be short-lived. As Eleanor disappeared down the jet bridge, her quiet strength left an indelible impression on those who had witnessed the scene. What no one, least of all Maya, realized was that this humble woman's exit would set off a chain of events that would change the airline forever. As Mrs. Eleanor sat quietly in the terminal near Gate 12, she remained composed, reflecting on the events that had just unfolded. Though publicly humiliated, she carried herself with the same dignity she had displayed on the plane. What Maya and everyone else on the flight didn't know was that Eleanor wasn't just any passenger. A short distance away, her son, David Carter, was sitting in his executive office, reviewing daily reports when his phone buzzed with urgency. A senior manager called, his tone uneasy. "Sir, there's an incident involving your mother aboard one of our flights," the manager said cautiously. David froze. "What kind of incident?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with a growing tension. The manager hesitated. "A flight attendant mistreated her. Passengers have been reporting it, and there's video footage being shared." David's jaw tightened. "Send me everything," he demanded. "Videos, passenger complaints, and the name of the flight attendant involved. I want details immediately." The next few moments were a flurry of activity. As the reports began flooding his inbox, David's expression darkened. Watching the video footage and reading the accounts of passengers who had witnessed the incident made his anger boil over. "She called security on my mother," David said aloud, his voice barely restrained, "and treated her like she didn't belong." He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. His mother had always taught him the importance of acting decisively but with grace. This was no time for unchecked emotion. David grabbed his phone and dialed Eleanor. She answered after the first ring, her voice calm, as if nothing had happened. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now but still brimming with concern. "I'm fine, David," Eleanor replied. "I didn't want to cause a scene, but I thought you should know." David sighed heavily, guilt washing over him. "Mom, this is bigger than a scene. What Maya did was unacceptable. I'm on my way to the airport right now. I'll make sure you're comfortable and I'll handle this personally." Eleanor's voice was reassuring. "You've always been a man of your word, David. I trust you'll do the right thing." Meanwhile, back at the airline's operations center, David was mobilizing his team. He demanded that Maya's personnel file, training records, and any previous complaints against her be pulled immediately. "Let me be clear," David said to his staff. "We are a company that prides itself on exceptional service and respect for every passenger. What happened today doesn't just affect my mother, it reflects poorly on all of us. I want Maya removed from her position, and will deal with her appropriately once I've spoken with my mother and the other passengers involved." As David made his way to the airport, the reports from passengers continued to pile up. Many praised Eleanor's calm and composed demeanor, while others expressed outrage over Maya's unprofessional behavior. Some had already begun uploading their videos to social media, and the incident was starting to gain traction online. When David finally arrived at the terminal, he found Eleanor sitting in a quiet corner. She greeted him with a warm smile, as if the events of the day hadn't left her shaken. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said gently. "Yes, I did," David replied firmly. "What happened to you today is unacceptable, and I'm going to make sure it never happens again to you or anyone else." Eleanor reached for her son's hand, her touch grounding him. "I'm proud of you, David, not because of what you do, but because of who you are." David nodded, his resolve hardening. "This isn't just about protecting you, Mom. It's about setting a standard for how we treat every person who steps onto one of our planes. I won't let this slide." Little did Maya know, her actions had set in motion a response far greater than she could have anticipated. The wheels were turning, and David was determined to ensure that justice was not just served, but that lasting change would follow. The flight was just minutes away from departure when Maya heard her name called over the intercom. "Miss Maya, please report to the front of the cabin immediately." Maya frowned, confused but confident. She adjusted her uniform and walked briskly to the front, unaware that her actions had set off a chain of events she could no longer control. As she reached the front of the cabin, her confusion turned to shock when she saw David Carter standing there, his expression icy and composed. Maya froze, her confidence wavering as the realization of who he was began to dawn on her. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice faltering. David wasted no time. "Maya," he began, his voice low but sharp, "do you realize the gravity of your actions today?" Maya's mouth opened, but no words came out. David continued, his tone cutting through the silence. "The so-called disruption you reported was my mother, Mrs. Eleanor Carter, the woman you mistreated, humiliated, and targeted without cause." Maya's face drained of color. "I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "That's no excuse," David interrupted, his voice growing firmer. "You don't treat any passenger that way, regardless of who they are. Your behavior was unprofessional, discriminatory, and entirely unacceptable." Maya attempted to defend herself, her voice frantic now. "Sir, I was under a lot of pressure. It wasn't personal, I was just doing my job." David held up his hand, silencing her. "Doing your job does not include degrading passengers or abusing your authority. Your actions have not only embarrassed this airline, but have also brought undue harm to someone who deserved nothing but respect." Maya's confidence shattered completely as David motioned to two security officers standing nearby. "Escort her off this plane," he said, his voice resolute. "Please, Mr. Carter," Maya pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Give me another chance." David's expression didn't waver. "This conversation is over. You'll receive your termination paperwork immediately." As the officers led Maya off the plane, the cabin was silent, save for the murmurs of passengers who had been waiting for this moment. Some clapped quietly, while others recorded her exit on their phones. The termination was swift and final. Maya signed the documents with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. Meanwhile, the videos of her behavior continued to spread online, sparking outrage. Attempts to defend herself, claiming she was under stress, fell flat. Maya's career in aviation was over, but her actions would serve as a reminder to everyone watching. Prejudice and disrespect carry consequences, and justice, when served, can be swift and uncompromising. After the incident, Mrs. Eleanor Carter could have quietly accepted her son David's efforts to make things right. But that wasn't her way. Eleanor, with her lifelong belief in fairness and respect, saw an opportunity to create lasting change, not just for herself, but for everyone who might one day step onto an airline. When David approached her with a heartfelt apology and a promise to ensure justice, Eleanor responded with quiet determination. "This is bigger than just me," she said. "I want to make sure no one else has to go through what I did." Inspired by her resilience, David proposed something bold. Eleanor would take on an advisory role within the airline, using her unique perspective to advocate for systemic change. Though she had never worked in a corporate environment, Eleanor didn't hesitate. "If I'm going to help make this better, I want to lead, not just observe," she said firmly. Eleanor immediately began working with David and his team to overhaul the airline's policies. Together, they implemented mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all employees, focusing on unconscious bias, empathy, and inclusive communication. These sessions emphasized the importance of treating every passenger with dignity, regardless of their background or appearance. Under Eleanor's guidance, the airline also introduced a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, ensuring swift consequences for violations. To further promote diversity, she championed initiatives to hire staff from underrepresented communities, fostering a more inclusive workplace culture. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. News of Eleanor's actions spread quickly, with media outlets and social platforms celebrating her grace and determination. People admired her ability to transform a painful experience into a catalyst for progress. "Mrs. Eleanor Carter is a true inspiration," one headline read, turning adversity into advocacy. Passengers who had witnessed the incident on the plane wrote letters of support, sharing their gratitude for her strength and resilience. Many remarked how her calm and composed demeanor during the ordeal had left a lasting impression. Eleanor's efforts not only helped restore the airline's reputation, but also sparked a broader conversation about respect and equality in customer service industries. Through it all, Eleanor remained humble, often reflecting on the values she had learned and passed down to her family. Perseverance, kindness, and the power of standing up for what's right. Her legacy became one of transformation, proving that even in moments of great injustice, the strength to create lasting change can rise from the quietest voices. Eleanor Carter's journey is a testament to the transformative power of resilience. What began as a moment of public humiliation on a flight became the catalyst for systemic change in an entire airline. Her quiet strength, even in the face of injustice, and her determination to create a more inclusive and respectful environment have left an enduring legacy. This story reminds us of the importance of treating everyone with dignity, no matter their appearance or background. It also highlights the strength of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Eleanor's actions prove that one person's courage can ignite meaningful change. No matter who you are, you have the power to make a difference. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe for more real-life stories like this one. Together, let's spread messages of hope and equality.